It begins in a town most maps forget, curled beneath the shadows of the Cascade Mountains, where fog clings to the pine branches like memory. It's the kind of place where the trees have grown tall enough to keep secrets and old enough to remember. The people here speak softly, used to the hush that blankets the glens. But every so often, a story rises from the undergrowth, too strange to dismiss and too persistent to forget. There's one tale told, more often in whispers than words, that has lingered for years among the families in Sisters, Oregon. It's passed around children like a bedtime warning, and by the old men at the bar over whiskies dulled with age. Most say it happened just over a decade ago. A family lost in the forest. A blinding storm. No compass, no map, no hope, and at the center of it, Alan, aging golden retriever, completely blind, and somehow ... Their only guide. Some call it luck, others instinct. But then there are those who suggest something quieter, harder to hold, something you can't chart or document. They say the woods opened for him, that the dog listened to a language no one could hear, that he saw the forest not with his eyes, but with something purer. 12 miles, no visibility, a family of 4 with no way home, and yet they made it. How does a dog with no eyes see the path no human can? And why did he lead them where no GPS dared to go? This isn't a tale of science overcoming superstition or a fable wrapped in nostalgia. It's something else, something you'll have to sit with for a while. Let it move slow, the way fog moves over the forest floor, quiet and patient, because sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't even see you, only feels you, and that, somehow, is enough. They called him Cooper, a good boy, like the best of them. But if the stories hold true, he might have been something more. The Lanier family lived in a simple blue house on the edge of town, where fences were more suggestion than rule, and the sun took its time rising past the pines. Mornings began with coffee and the sound of shoelaces being tied, and evenings settled into the hush of homework, skillet dinners, and soft music playing from a decade-old speaker in the corner of the living room. It was a house that held warmth the way thick sweaters do in winter, steady and reliable. Jason taught earth sciences to high schoolers who were usually more interested in their phones than in fault lines. Claire worked as a school counselor, the kind who never forgot a student's name or favorite book. Their days moved with the kind of rhythm you don't notice until it's gone. Abby, 11, had a notebook full of forest fairies and maps of imaginary civilizations. Owen, 8, was still figuring out if frogs or frisbees ranked higher on his joy list. And then there was Cooper, golden-coated and gentle. Cooper had arrived as a clumsy pup with muddy paws and an appetite for socks. For 5 years, he chased tennis balls with abandon, herded the kids through the backyard like they were sheep, and guarded bedtime as if nightmares were tangible things. But one spring, the light left Cooper's eyes and it never came back. It started with hesitation at the porch steps. Then came the bumped furniture, the once graceful trots turning into uncertain steps. After weeks of tests and questions without return, the diagnosis slid across the vet's desk like a final report card. Sudden acquired retinal degeneration syndrome, SARS permanent. No treatment. They expected him to retreat, to mourn the loss, like something stolen. But Cooper didn't know how to disappear. He memorized the house by scent and step. He followed new voice commands with a tilt of the head and a patient sit. The children learned not to move his water bowl. Jason added bells to key doors. Claire taught Abby and Owen hand signals to pair with spoken cues, just in case he could still sense motion somehow. What never changed were the soft sighs he gave when he curled beside them on the couch, the way he tilted his head when laughter filled the room, or how, when someone cried, Cooper would press his body close with a stillness that held more comfort than words. Summer came with scents of distant fires and the buzz of mosquito wings. Plans for their first real hiking trip in years started with folded maps and navy-grade packing lists spread across the dining table. Jason wanted to teach the kids to read stars. Claire imagined cool evenings in sleeping bags, freckles kissed by mountain sun. The children imagined s'mores and stories and pretending to be pioneers. A family adventure bee for middle school separated centimeters into distances. There was hesitation, though. One obvious weight in the room. "What about Coop?" Jason had asked. "He can't do 12 miles, not blind," said Claire. "He'll get hurt or lost. And we can't carry him," Abby had added, voice low. Owen looked at his plate. Cooper lay at his usual spot under the table, head resting across his front paws, catching tone if not meaning. But then he stood, slowly, and walked over to Claire's seat. He sat beside her heel and gave one short, upward nudge with his nose. No one spoke for a moment. "I think he wants to come," Abby whispered. Another pause followed. Not silence, really. Just the sound of a quiet agreement being shaped inside every heart at that table, and so they packed an extra sleeping pad, brought rubber booties for Cooper's paws, added dried chicken snacks to the food list. "He goes," Jason said simply, because Cooper hadn't missed a single night's bedtime since the day he arrived. Not one, and this was just another night in a longer journey he refused to abandon. Their backpacks leaned ready against the wall by the door. Cooper's leash hung like a promise beside them. The trailhead was quiet when they arrived, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate as if the forest was waiting. Jason parked the car at the edge of a turnout rarely marked on tourist maps, the engine ticking as it cooled. Pines arched high. Above, knitted so close, the sunlight bent between them in narrow threads. Cooper lifted his head from the back seat, his nose twitching before his paws hit the ground. Claire adjusted the straps on Owen's backpack, while Abby double-checked her compasser gift from Jason last Christmas, though the orange paint on its edge was already chipping. The sky was generous and blue, with just a handful of clouds drifting like thoughts not yet fully formed. The hike to their base camp took most of the morning. The trail, narrow in parts but well-worn, wound past moss-covered boulders and ferns that reached like green hands toward the light. Cooper moved slowly, deliberately, his paws navigating dips and rises with the care of someone listening to an unseen map. Abby called step or rock when needed. Owen cleared low branches with a stick like a pint-sized explorer. They reached the glen by afternoon. It was a hidden bowl in the woods, ringed by firs, where two streams met under a fallen cedar. You wouldn't find it unless you'd lived there or trusted intuition. Jason picked the spot years ago on a solo hike and had tucked it away in memory like a secret. Tents went up, sleeping pads unfurled. Cooper settled onto his own mat with a soft groan, front legs stretched out and head tilted toward the sun. Dinner that night was rehydrated chili and laughter carried on pine-scented air. Jason used his laser pointer to trace constellations, telling stories about how ancient people used the stars to find their way home. Cooper stayed close to the children, head nestled between them. As the night deepened, the forest which had buzzed with noise all day grew silent, respectful. Their fire cracked low and steady, warmth humming in the circle it carved out from darkness. The second day passed in gentle rhythm, short hikes, wildflower identifications with Abby's hand-drawn field guide. Owen tried to skip stones across the stream, mostly just splash lessons, Claire wrote in her small leather-bound journal. Jason grilled sandwiches over the fire, losing track of time somewhere between bites and stories. Cooper kept pace, always near, sometimes leading, sometimes pausing to let a bird call rise through unseen branches. His tail would wag gently at familiar scents, moss, bark, the salt of Jason's hands. Toward evening, the wind shifted. Claire noticed first the air felt tense, brittle as if the trees were holding breath. A hawk flew low and fast overhead. Later, Abby pointed out that her compass needle had stuttered briefly before swinging back into place. Jason brushed it off, but tucked the thought into the edge of his mind. There were tiny warnings, like threads pulled from a sweater. That night, they heard a distant animal cry one Claire swore wasn't native to that part of Oregon. An elk, maybe. But it sounded wrong. Too high, too alone. Still, they slept. Morning of day 3 started light enough. Crisp air, clear sky, stretching wide. Puffy clouds, shaped like ships. Over breakfast, Jason suggested something different. There was a path branching behind the Cedar Faller Deer Run, not marked on any official map. When he'd hiked solo years ago, he'd followed it for a while, thought it looped back to the main trail, maybe connected near Whispering Rock. Claire hesitated. It's not recorded. Jason nodded. Figured we'd go an hour or two. Just exploration. No heavy packs. They all agreed partially because it felt like a good way to spend the morning. Partially because saying no to the wild can be harder once you're in it. They packed water, snacks, light gear, left breadcrumbs tied, bits of biodegradable, ribbon to branches, and made notes on a small pocket map. Cooper's body language changed subtly the moment they turned off the main trail. His ears twitched more. He pawed slower, but he followed without hesitation, staying close to Claire at first, then trailing Owen's scent. The deer path started wide but quickly narrowed. Brambles clutched at pant legs. Roots coiled like slow moving snakes under the soil. The sky narrowed to slivers, the sun blinking between leaves, now more dense than before. Still, the mood was light. Abby laughed when Owen tripped and caught himself with a dramatic roll. Jason pointed out a track that might have been bobcat. Claire paused once to take a photo of mushrooms growing in a perfect circular fairy ring. 2 hours passed quicker. Then they noticed. Then the wind shifted again. A low rumble rolled across the hills, the kind you don't hear so much as feel in the chest, the kind that makes birds go silent, a distant hiss of trees bending in unity. Rain came after, hard and fast, falling in sheets rather than drops. They turned to head back. The ribbons they'd tied had vanished. The wind or animals, maybe. The path they'd followed in had already started to fade, covered in slick leaves and downed branches. Worse, just ahead, the trail disappeared completely, blocked by a rock slide that looked recent. Jason tried to consult the small map, but the ink blurred. His GPS part of a multi-use watch refused to load position. Claire checked her phone. No bars. Not even emergency signal. Trees do strange things in storms. They bend, yes, but they also shift what you remember. Distances change. Hills that were downhill become flat. The forest plays tricks with line of sight and direction. We'll just backtrack to that clearing, Claire said, her voice calm for the kids' sake. But backtrack became sidetrack. Sidetrack dissolved into uncertainty. The rain blurred landmarks. Certain logs looked familiar until they didn't. Time moved differently, elastic, filled with too much silence or too many decisions. Cooper walked with more care now. His paws hesitated before steps, but he stayed close when the path dissolved. His ear turned toward whichever child was nearest. Eventually, Abby said what lingered on everyone's lips. "Are we lost?" Jason didn't answer. Claire knelt beside the children. "We're just off course, and we'll fix it." They sheltered. That night, under a torch sheet pulled between trees, Jason's ankles swelling from a slick route he'd missed in the downpour. They kept warm, pressed together, while water pattered above them in constant rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, branches snapped. A low howl rose over the dark. Not wolf, not coyote, something alone. The fire they started fizzled fast. Owen whispered prayers to his stuffed bear. Abby didn't write in her field guide. Only Cooper stayed alert, his body taut, ears flicking, waiting, listening. Some part of him already moving ahead. The rain didn't let up by morning. It deepened into a steady, cold curtain that blurred shapes and silenced birds. Pine needles stuck to everything. Jason's ankle had swollen beneath the compress Claire had wrapped that night, and though he tried to hide it, every movement tugged a grimace across his face. Cooper rose with them, his body damp but poised, padding toward each family member in turn. He paused beside Jason longer, as if understanding the shift in strength, in who could lead and who now couldn't. Breakfast was dry granola and measured sips of water. The children didn't speak much. Abby clutched her small compass, but it spun slowly, pointing nowhere with any confidence. Owen looked toward the place the path had been, hoping it might have returned overnight, but where they'd come from no longer looked familiar. Claire studied the surroundings carefully. Every tree bore the same lines, the same moisture. Bark. Her journal had been soaked beyond use, her notes unreadable. She forced a breath past rising panic and smiled at the kids. "Let's try south," she said, guessing. They moved, not quickly, but with purpose, pushing between damp ferns and over uprooted limbs. Jason leaned on a branch he carved into a crutch with a multi-tool. His jaw was tight. Cooper walked slower now, careful not to drift too far from the group. Around mid-morning, they saw the same leaning tree they'd passed the night before. Claire stopped. "That can't be right." Abby looked at her map. "We turned at the mossy rock, didn't we?" But there was no mossy rock here. There never had been. The day stretched thin. Each direction they tried fed them deeper into sameness ridges, repeating sun swallowed by canopy. The granola disappeared quickly. Owen cried softly once, but Cooper pressed gently into his side until he got quiet again. They came upon a clearing strewn with pine cones and storm-felled branches. Claire dropped the packs and raised trembling fingers to her face. Jason sat on a fallen log and groaned, ankle pulsing red and blue beneath his soaked sock. "We need to stop," he managed. Claire looked at the sky now, sort of night in it yet, but the clouds weighed heavy with warning. Still early afternoon, but everything felt late as they rested. A sharp cry echoed nearby, something avian, metallic in tone, not quite right. Claire locked eyes with Jason. Birds didn't call like that here, and never when it rained, drenched and exhausted. They didn't argue when Claire pulled the kids into her arms, Jason leaning in with as much strength as he could muster. They formed a pile under the emergency tarp, clutching the last dry blanket between them, but Cooper stayed outside the bundle. He paced the perimeter in slow arcs, sniffing the air, ears twitching. Occasionally he'd stop and tilt his head, as though hearing instructions no one else could. Abby called to him, her voice barely above wind. "You can come cuddle, too." Cooper paused, then walked to her, curled beside her hip. He shivered. Once, then stilled. His eyes, clouded and sightless, faced the tree line. That night was colder. The rain slowed but left behind a mist, thin and colorless, clinging to everything like unfinished breath. Their fire barely lived through the wind and Claire's reluctant use of the last dry matches. Jason slept fitfully, ankle throbbing. Owen curled tighter around his bear. Abby stared up through the trees until her eyes blurred, and somewhere just beyond reaching distance, something moved. Branches shifted. Not wind, something pacing. Or watching, Cooper rose again, no growl, no bark. Only a low, quiet whine. He stood still, then tugged slightly forward, leash dragging behind him. Claire sat up, heart thudding. But Cooper didn't wander. He returned after a few feet, then tugged. Forward again. "Coop," she said carefully. "What is it?" The dog froze, waited, then walked a few more paces forward, then toward the dark, then circled back and nudged her arm. He repeated it, again and again. Jason, barely able to sit upright, watched with furrowed brow. "He's showing us something," he muttered. "That's behavior. Repetition means direction." Claire's mouth went dry. "You think he smells something? Either that, or he knows something's wrong in where we are." The next morning, the air smelled metallic like something struck stone on purpose. Mist clung low. Cooper stood before them, tail still, facing one direction with a quiet certainty that unnerved and amazed. They looked at each other, then they followed him. Cooper did not lead like someone who knew the end. He guided like someone who knew the next step. He padded forward 5 paces, then turned back, waited, nudged a leg or circled a lingering foot. If someone paused too long, he returned to them, gently but insistently, until they moved again. At first it seemed like wandering. Jason, stiff with pain, considered it aimless, just a dog, following scents, like he always did. But over hours, a pattern emerged. Cooper didn't meander. He moved with careful intent, repeating only when the family hesitated. If they chose another direction, he'd pause, then double back, ears twitching, body still, until they rejoined him. By late morning, even the children stopped questioning. They just followed. The forest looked the same everywhere: wet bark, tangled ferns, ravines, bleeding rainwater. But Cooper moved with increasing certainty, sniffing the air with short, deliberate bursts. Once, he stopped at a cluster of broken sticks near a stream, noses the ground, then took a sharp left. Minutes later, they heard rushing water, fresh, clean. Claire cupped her hands beneath a frayed trickle cascading down a stone outcrop. She handed sips to the kids. Jason bent one knee slowly into the mud and drank from a cupped palm with shaking fingers. "How did he?" Abby started, but didn't finish. Cooper was already moving forward. They kept walking. One slow hour became another. The mist became patchy sunlight. That faint metallic scent from earlier faded, replaced by moss and new fern growth. Twice, Cooper stopped at forked trails. Each time, he sniffed the air, turned his head for a moment as though listening, and chose the quieter path, less trodden, more overgrown. That night, they found shelter inside a hollow where an old tree had fallen and split near the bezer. Soft bed of needles, dry and shielded by bark, not visible from the trail. Claire blinked in disbelief. Cooper stopped at its mouth, faced the family, and wagged. He didn't enter until they set down their packs beside it. Jason sat with his back against the roots. "We would have missed this entirely," he said, quietly. "Would have walked right past it. Doesn't even look like anything from out there," Claire murmured later. As they bundled tight beneath a tarp and blanket, Abby curled next to her brother. Cooper pressed firmly against her ribs, his breath warm against her arm, steady and shallow. "I don't think we're going to die," she whispered against his fur. She felt his tail swish once, then go still. "Just don't leave us yet, okay?" She added, "Go per side," the kind of soft sound dogs make when every muscle resets. A full body calm. The storm returned just before dawn, softer this time, but cold. The family waited it out amid the tangled roots, warm only where their bodies met. Cooper rose twice during the early watch, pacing, listening. A few times he went a light, low sound. When the clouds broke again, he stood silently at the edge of the hollow, tail up, waiting. They moved slowly now. Jason leaned heavily on both Claire and the stick, fashioned into a support. The children, too tired to ask questions, too trusting, too care, followed the only constant they had. Somewhere around midday, near a ridge lined with burnt stumps and glassy obsidian rock, Cooper stopped cold. His hackles didn't rise, but something in him froze. No one else saw or heard anything, but Cooper did. He turned, slow and deliberate, and veered slightly off the rutted path they'd found. Not far, only by a few feet, but it led them behind a dense cluster of manzanita bushes, and right there, tucked beyond sight, an aged game trail. Thin, but walkable. Claire blinked. "This wasn't here yesterday." Jason leaned forward, eyes wide. He single quotes, "Under forest." They didn't ask how. They just kept moving. Late that evening, a bird flapped upward near Cooper's paws, making Owen yelp. But Cooper followed its flight silently, alert and unwavering. Within 10 minutes, they reached a stream that matched none from earlier. More importantly, they recognized a broken footbridge nearby. Jason had crossed it years before. They were closer than they thought. Still, weariness clung like wet clothes. Cooper's alertness never cracked, though his gait slowed. The next day their fourth, fully off trail was harder. Feet blistered. Water was low again. Abby stumbled twice. Jason's leg had swollen so badly Claire wrapped pine needles with cloth to keep pressure even. But Cooper tugged forward. His pauses grew briefer, a new urgency in how he trotted ahead, then circled back. At one point, Abby collapsed at the foot of a steep rise. "I can't," she whispered. Cooper didn't bark. He didn't nudge. He simply sat near her, head tilted, listening, then gently rose and took 5 steps up the incline, stopped, looked back. Abby stared, then stood. They crested the rise, trembling but alive. Below, valley foothills, and the faint scent of smoke curling through the air from a place not natural, not wild. It was human. Cooper raised his head into the wind, then barked, just once, the kind of sound that says, "This way." They followed him down. The morning met them with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that felt heavy, expectant. Trees stripped from the last of the storm's passing, the air holding a chill that tugged at skin and spirit alike. Claire checked Jason's ankle. His sock was dark with damp, the swelling gone from nuisance to threat. The homemade brace now barely held structure, and he winced with every slight adjustment. Abby and Owen stayed quiet, their voices thin from dehydration, sleep, and the long-shadowed hum of fear they no longer could name. No one asked the time anymore. No one asked how far. Cooper rose slowly, stretching like a tired sentinel. He sniffed the air not gently now, but with fast bursts, searching, scanning, considering. Then he faced west, tail firm, and began walking. No one questioned it. Not even Jason. They followed each footfall of his calmly, rhythmically. Where Cooper went, their feet learnt to follow. He led them through a grove stitched with blackberry thorns and old ashthorn scratches knitting across Owen's shins. But not once did the boy complain. Every now and then, Cooper would slow, pause, tilt his head as if listening to something, deep below or far beyond, then trot forward with sudden sureness. Around midday, they stumbled into a gully carved by years of runoff, just shallow enough to think they could cross. They climbed down together, limbs aching, nerves thin. Halfway across, the creek bed narrowed with water ankle deep, faster than it seemed. Abby slipped once on alga-slicked stone. Claire caught her with one hand, the other gripping Owen's elbow. Then, Owen lost his footing. He crashed into the current with a slap like stones hitting drumskin. His body swept 4 feet down in seconds. His mouth opened for a scream, but water hit it first. Panic bloomed across Claire's face, but before she could move, Cooper was already there. He plunged into the water, barking sharply once, twice, then swam ahead of Owen, body carving through the current. He turned in the flow, bumping the child toward a shallow edge with his side before locking eyes with Abby. "Grab him," Jason shouted from the gully's far side, voice strangled by pain. Abby lunged forward and caught Owen's arm. Claire knelt beside him in seconds, wet, shivering, stunned but alive. Cooper staggered out behind them, soaked to the chest, water flying off his coat in heavy arcs. He shook once, then looked up and kept walking. Not a word was said. Claire kissed Owen's head. Abby held Cooper's leash with 2 hands now, like it might anchor her from the unraveling of everything else. The hours passed, edged with desperation. Jason was now limping so heavily he had to rest every quarter mile. Cooper would nudge his leg occasionally, then rest too sprawled flat, letting Jason regain rhythm before starting again. Around dusk, they entered a clearing shaped like a question mark, trees opening up in a jagged crescent. A single stump sat at the center, old and hollowed, blackened by some forgotten fire. Cooper approached it, then stopped and barked 3 times, not frantic, not playful, urgent. There was nothing noticeable. Around them no trail markers, no sound beyond the trees. But then, faintly, so faintly, it first felt imagined they heard it. A voice, muffled, distant. But human. Jason turned, scanning. Was that? Another voice answered. Closer, Cooper. Barked again, and from the far side of the clearing, between 2 weather-struck pines, a woman in orange emerged, followed by a man in the same uniform. Behind them, 2 dogs, Zeers, alert, tails, high dot. Search and rescue. Claire fell to her knees. "I've got eyes on them," the woman called out behind her, pressing a radio to her shoulder. Within seconds, More figures arrived. Bright jackets, medpacks, poles and stretchers. The clearing filled like a breath coming back into the world. One of the canine units approached Cooper, who stood calmly, tail rising slightly. He was signaling, wasn't he? One of the handlers said, eyes wide. Your dog, I think we picked. Up his bark before anything else. Claire reached to pet Cooper, but found her hand trembling. She let it rest on his shoulders instead. He brought us here, she said softly. Jason managed a nod. He kept us alive. And Cooper, blind and soaked, and older than his muscles, laid down in the grass and sighed. Not from exhaustion, but something deeper, completion. A soft wind moved through the clearing, and somewhere beyond it, the forest listening still went quiet. When Cooper came home, he didn't run ahead like he used to, not because he couldn't see the porch, but because he didn't need to. Owen held the leash in one hand, the handles of a rescue duffel in the other. Abby clutched a handmade thank you card drawn while her foredrip ticked beneath fluorescent lights. Jason was carried in on a stretcher, foot swollen, wrapped, packed with painkillers and lessons he'd been too proud to admit before. And Claire walked behind them all, a hand resting on Cooper's back, like someone thanking a doorway for bringing her through. Across town, people baked casseroles and pies, left flowers in mason jars on their doorstep. Anonymous notes appeared in their mailbox. Welcome back, Cooper. One was signed by a third-grade class with 27 dog stickers. Nothing about their return was extravagant, but nothing was ordinary. Either Jason's recovery was slow, his ligaments had torn in 2 places, and he'd need crutches for weeks. He taught for a while from home, lecturing his students from the living room with his foot propped up and Cooper curled under his desk. Abby brought Cooper in for show and tell twice, though they didn't call it that in her school anymore. She read aloud a story she'd written titled The Pup Who Walked Without Eyes. It ended with the line, he never took the wrong path, just the one we didn't know we needed. Owen, for a few months, announced that he was going to be an animal rescuer when he grew up, then a paleontologist, then a firefighter dog. Each version included Cooper. Each drawing, to dot the local news, picked up the story first. A 2-minute segment under the title, 4 Days Lost, guided by blind, loyal companion. By the weekend, clips hit blogs, then rescue forums, then networks. A major pet relief foundation offered to send dog food for life. Claire declined gently, said Cooper was more into boiled chicken than kibble now. A group of canine trainers in Bend sent a certificate, honorary service dog by experience, not training. It came with a red bandana. Cooper didn't wear it often, but the children folded it into his memory box later. Right beside his leash, he aged quickly after that. Not poorly, just peacefully. Veterinary checkups came and went with words like gentle decline and no suffering. His joints stiffened, like the wood of old porches. His ears drooped in that way, heavy with time. He laid beside Jason's foot when it rained, curled near Claire's desk as she counseled high schoolers via video. He still wagged when Abby hummed in the kitchen and still leaned quietly into Owen when nightmares left his pillow soaked. 3 years passed like a season remembered just in time. They were all home on the morning he slipped away. No drama, no whimper, just a stillness in the ray of light that cast through the window where he'd napped so many days. Claire found him first, sat beside him on the floor with her, back against the cabinets. She stayed like that until Jason joined her. Then the kids came too. They didn't cry immediately. They just touched his fur, spoke his name, said thank you in ways only children and the grieving know how to say. They buried him out near the cedar trail behind the house. Above his resting place, Abby placed a painted stone. You saw what we didn't. Claire wrote a book that full soft words in rhythm for first graders. Illustrations of Cooper walking through ferns and fog, stars appearing in the lines of his fur. She named it The Dog Who Couldn't See But Saw Everything. It was picked up by a regional publisher, passed first from teacher to teacher, then school to school. Libraries requested copies for reading corners. One made it to a classroom in the same town where their forest walk began. A teacher emailed back a picture. A room filled with quiet listeners, several holding stuffed golden retrievers in their laps. Life continued, not untouched, not unchanged, just ... with the hollow now filled by memory and the warmth you only miss when it's gone at some point. Claire converted her journal, water-warped and barely legible, into typed pages with soft line breaks, a patchwork of the days they spent following footsteps they never saw, only heard through bark and wind and silence. In one entry she wrote, "He was never lost, only waiting for us to listen." And so they did. Somewhere high above the trees, the forest folds into itself like a green ocean, endless and quiet. From that distance, trails disappear. Footsteps mean nothing. Even the tallest pine blends into the tapestry. But within that stillness, miles deep, is the memory of 4 voices, 1 limp, 2 small hands, and a golden blur pressed against the silence. We think of seeing as the way to know the world. That vision leads, confirms, defines what is safe and what is true. Yet, in those days, lost beneath branches, it wasn't sight that found them. It was something older, slower, more honest. It was trust. It was instinct. It was love without demand. Cooper didn't see, he felt. And feeling, somehow, was enough. He listened to what couldn't be heard, shifts in air pressure, sense invisible to everything but memory. He followed certainty without needing proof, never asking to lead, never waiting for praise. He just knew. So he moved, and in moving, he saved. There's a kind of grace in that, in doing what's right without knowing the end, in walking even when the path isn't visible, in guiding people back to themselves, not with a light, but with presence. Years from now, the forest will reclaim those trails. Footprints will fade beneath needles and moss. The wind will thread through the same trees. And perhaps, sometimes, someone will pause in the middle of all that green and feel not fear but safety. Because maybe the woods remember him. Maybe there's still an echo of footsteps silent as moss. Maybe a short bark rides the wind when no one's around. Maybe a golden tail stirs the ferns beside some wandering child who's wandered too far. Maybe not, but Cooper didn't need a monument. He didn't need marble or medals or headlines. His legacy was quieter. The trails he made live inside for people who came home different. They laugh a little slower now, hug a little longer, stay outside a little more when the sun bends through the pine needles just right. Every one of them will say the same thing in different ways. He led us, he stayed. He knew the way when we didn't. He saw, and so they follow, still, in the ways that matter, even with their eyes closed.